Ambiguum 9. From St. Gregory, the theologian's oration on St. Athanasius. For it has nothing higher, nor will it ever have. It seems to me that with these words our godly-minded teacher frees his student from predicating of God any relation of comparison or differentiation, or whatever else one wishes to call it. For the experts in these matters say that this particular form of speech is independent of relation, and is no different from saying that God is incomparably beyond all things, since it has the force of a transcendent negation. Ambiguum 10, from St. Gregory's same oration on St. Athanasius. To whomsoever it has been granted to pass, by means of reason and contemplation, through matter and this fleshly cloud or veil, whichever it should be called, and attain kinship with God, and be mingled with the purest light, to the extent that this is possible for human nature, that person is blessed, owing to his ascent from here and his divinization there, which is given by true philosophy and by passing beyond the material dyad on account of the unity perceived in the Trinity. 1. Introduction. I do not think that Gregory's teaching concerning the virtue of the saints, which we discussed when we were together, is at all deficient, even if, as you wrote, there are some who think this, based on the fact that here he speaks of those who pursue divine philosophy solely through reason and contemplation, saying nothing about the practice of bodily asceticism. On the contrary, I take it that when the teacher affirms that divine philosophy is achieved through reason and contemplation, he, in actuality, is quite clearly implying that the saints' true judgment and action concerning beings, which alone I would be so bold as to define as philosophy in the fullest sense of the word, is twofold. This is because bodily practice is absolutely conjoined with reason, and the judgment it presupposes is contained in contemplation. If it is true, as it certainly is, that while the aim of reason is to order the body's movements, skillfully using the bridle of right thinking to restrain it from irrational impulses, the task of contemplation is the prudent adoption of what has been properly understood and judged, revealing, like a most radiant light, the truth itself by true knowledge. To be sure, it is by means of reason and contemplation that every philosophical virtue is created and sustained, and it is also by them that such virtue is manifested in and through the body, though not wholly, for the body cannot contain virtue, which is a form imprinted within it by divine power. But it does have certain traces of it, imparted not for the benefit of virtue, but so that those who are naked of its grace might come to imitate the divine form of life of those who love God, inasmuch as they have cast off the deformity of vice through participation in the beautiful, and so come to be ranked with those who are worthy of God, or so that those who are in need of some help might obtain it from those who are able to provide it. And when they acquire the disposition of the virtuous, which is hidden in the depths of the soul, but manifested through bodily practice, they praise the providence of God, which has become all things in everyone, and through all things is present to all, so that, if there were no one who needed to be helped by an act of virtue, or who stood in need of an example to show him what virtue is, it would not be out of place to say that each one of those who is adorned with the graces of the soul is absolutely sufficient for himself, even without the manifestation of these virtues through the body. Therefore, anyone who through contemplation has piously understood the manner in which beings exist, and who through deduction and logical deliberation has correctly discerned their inner rationality, and who keeps this judgment to himself, or rather, who keeps himself steadfast in this judgment, comprehends within himself the sum of all virtue, and is no longer moved toward anything beyond the truth that he has already come to know. In his zeal, he hastens past all things, taking no thought for the world or the flesh, for he has already, and without resistance, subjected the practical life to reason, since his capacity for discursive reasoning, which is within our control, has endowed him with rational principles, at once powerful and dispassionate, according to which all virtue and knowledge exist and subsist, for they are powers of the rational soul, and depend in no way on the body for their existence, though they do not refrain from using the body at the appropriate time in order to manifest themselves for the reasons we stated above. For they say that what is particular to the mind is the understanding of intelligible things, the virtues, the sciences, the principles of the arts, the power of choice and deliberation, whereas what is general to it are judgments, the power of assent, dissent, and impulses, some of which belong solely to intellectual contemplation, and others to the capacity for rational thinking. If then it was by means of these that the saints preserved their proper mode of life, then the blessed Gregory, in mentioning only reason and contemplation, is in fact recommending to the saints all the principles of virtue and knowledge in summary fashion, for it was through these that the saints devoted themselves to reflection on God, cognitively in contemplation, and it was by making prudent use of reason that they imprinted the divine form within themselves by the stamp of the virtues. It seems clear, then, that the blessed teacher did not consider it necessary to mention the bodily practice of asceticism, for he knew that by itself it does not create virtue, but merely manifests it, and that it is but the servant of divine thoughts and ideas. To make this clear in a different manner, those who have made a careful study of human nature say that the faculty of reason has two aspects, the contemplative and the practical. The contemplative aspect is the power of the intellect to understand what pertains to beings, whereas the practical is the deliberative power that determines the right use of reason for those engaged in practice. The former they call the contemplative intellect, the latter practical reason, but also wisdom and prudence, respectively. If this is correct, then the teacher called practice reason in light of its cause, which was a very natural thing to do, and consequently said nothing about its material basis. In so doing, he identified practice as a state of mind that has nothing contrary to it. For the contemplative man remains firmly fixed among true things, not polemically and agnostically, but rationally and cognitively, and he will not endure to look upon anything else but these truths, owing to the pleasure he takes in them. If it is necessary to make this even clearer, we may turn to those who have exercised themselves in the principles of perfection in virtue. They say that those who have not yet attained purity in their relation to matter continue to be occupied with ascetic practices because their judgment of beings is still confused, and they themselves are subject to change, since they have not yet relinquished their attachments to changeable things. But those, on the other hand, who through the extremity of virtue establish a close relation to God, and who by coming to understand Him bear the fruit of blessedness, are turned solely to themselves and God, for they have truly severed the attachment that bound them to material things, and have advanced beyond questions of practice, and indeed have become total strangers to matter itself, while growing in friendship with God through contemplation. Therefore it is said that such people are no longer subject to change, since they no longer have any attachment to matter, for one who is dominated by matter necessarily changes in a way contrary to nature, along with matter, which is itself naturally changeable. And knowing that, whoever wishes to break free from his attachment to matter requires the greatest power, the teacher says, to whomsoever it has been granted to pass, by means of reason,